Everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. Come and eat. The word feasts here in Leviticus 23 verse 2 is not the Hebrew word for feasts. It is the Hebrew word which means appointed times. It's the word moedim, M-O-E-D-I-M, or in a singular form, it's the Hebrew word moed. It means appointed times. And it says, the feasts or the appointed times of Yehovah, which you shall proclaim to be Mekrai Kodesh, holy convocations. So all of these moedim are times when Yehovah's people are supposed to come together. They are holy or set apart or kadosh meetings or reunions where he chooses, Yehovah is chosen to make an appointment with his people. These are my feasts or moedim. So technically all the biblical holidays, if we go by the strict meaning of the Hebrew words, are appointed times. But they're not all feasts, because there's another Hebrew word that has to do with feasts, and it's the word chag, C-H-A-G. Chag, C-H-A-G. And there are only 3 biblical holidays or appointed times that have that term chag in their title. And they are the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which we read about in it's Leviticus 23 verse 6. And it says, and on the 15th day of the same month is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, Chag HaMatzot. Now the word feast there is not the word moed, or plural of which is moedim, the same word that you see up there in Leviticus 23 verse 2. This is why you've got to get into the Hebrew, because sometimes the English uses the same word for 2 different Hebrew words. But the word feast, as in Feast of Unleavened Bread, is the word chag, C-H-A-G. And then if we go down here, so Passover is not a feast. First fruits is not a feast, even though in my Bible, in the man-made subtitle, it says Feast of First Fruits, but it's not a feast. The Bible doesn't call it a feast. And then if you go down here to Leviticus 23 verse 15, and actually it comes into shall count. Where does it say feast here? Maybe this verse doesn't say feast. But elsewhere, so here this is referring to the Feast of Weeks. It says you shall count 50 days, and I guess it doesn't specifically say Feast of Weeks here. But if you go over to Deuteronomy 16, well, let's hold that verse there. Hold that thought. And if we go down here to Tabernacle, it says, verse 23, verse 34, it says the Feast of Tabernacles, the Feast of Tabernacles. So there's the word chag again. And then if you go down here to verse 37, it says, now after all of these biblical moedim, or 7 holidays, biblical holidays have been just laid out, enumerated in chronological order here in Leviticus 23. In verse 37, it says, these are the feasts of Yehovah, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations. So the word feasts there is not the word chag, it is the word moedim, just like in 23 verse 2. So and these are holy convocation, or Mikrai Kodesh. So they are literally times there when Yehovah's people are to get together, and they're called Sabbaths, beside the Sabbaths of Yehovah. So anyway, these are the Sabbaths, and including this is the weekly Sabbath. So there are only 3 biblical holidays that fit the definition for technically being feasts as the Bible defines them. A feast was where the Israelites would gather together at a place where Yehovah had placed his name, and they would come from all over the land and all over wherever the Israelites were scattered, and they would meet wherever the tabernacle was, or the temple. And eventually that became Jerusalem. And we know that, I want to get back to this point, we know that Pentecost is one of the three feasts where the Israelites would leave their homes and go up to where Elohim had placed his name, and they would all gather together. We see this in Deuteronomy 16. It says, starting in verse 1, observe the month of Abib and keep the Passover. And then it talks about Passover, and it talks about referring to 6 days you shall eat unleavened bread. So here Passover and unleavened bread were back-to-back holidays, and we read in Leviticus 23 that there it is, the unleavened bread is called Chag HaMatzot, or the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Here the term Feast of Unleavened Bread is not mentioned, but because Passover fell on the 14th day of the first month, and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, a 7-day festival, started on the 15th day of the first month in the biblical New Year, back in early spring. These two, typically the Israelites would go up to wherever he placed his name. Yovad placed his name. Later it eventually became Jerusalem. And they would keep Passover and unleavened bread because they were back-to-back situations. And so Passover and unleavened bread became, in the New Testament, there's some, basically in Hebraic terms, synonymous. It was a colloquialism. So each one was, you could say Passover and it would refer to unleavened bread, or you could say unleavened bread and it would refer to Passover, because they happened back to back. Now we get down here, Deuteronomy 16 verse 9, and you see here the term Feast of Weeks, Chag HaShavuot. Shavua is the Hebrew word for week. Shavuot is plural for weeks. And so here the Feast of Weeks, or Pentecost, here is referred to as a feast, or a chag. So even though it doesn't refer to it as a chag in Leviticus 23, we see it referred here to as a chag. And then we have verse the Feast of Tabernacles, verse 13, Feast of Tabernacles, Chag HaSukkot. And now then we come to verse 16, where it says, 3 times in a year all your males shall appear before Yehovah your Elohim in the place which he shall choose. At the Feast of Unleavened Bread, Chag HaMatzot. At the Feast of Weeks, Chag HaShavuot. And at the Feast of Tabernacles, Chag HaSukkot. So we have Chag HaMazet, Chag HaShavuot, and Chag HaSukkot. Those are the 3 feasts. Now there's 7 appointed times where people are to gather together for an assembly, a communal or a gathering together, like a service. And I already mentioned what those 7 are, but 3 of them were to be kept where he had placed his name. The other ones were to be, did them at home. They were Yom Teruah and Yom Kippur. You did those at home. You did not go up to Jerusalem or wherever to keep them, to place his name. So I understand that some people, and I loosely refer in my writings and teachings, I refer to the 7 feasts of the Lord. But technically there are 7 appointed times, or 7 Moedim, or 7 Mikrai Kodesh, but not 7 feasts. I use that term loosely, recognizing there's technically only 3 feasts. So I wanted to make that very clear. This, because of the English in our Bible translations, translating the Hebrew from Hebrew to English, there's some of this is misunderstood and people get confused.
Be found, call upon his name. He's near, he's near, he's near. Yeshu Hashem Behir Matzov Keravu Yoto Karov Karov Yasov Rashad Darko Yishavim Machshevotav Yashovel Ad Hashem Yarbe is Yeshua Hashem behimatzo kerahu yota karo karo Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon his name. He is near. He is near. Yeshua Hashem behimatzo